So I'd like to welcome Hannah Brown. She will be sharing with us both her personal and professional experience. Hannah specializes in transformation with a bachelor's degree in fine arts and in architecture from Rhode Island School of Design. Hannah spent her early career as an architect of buildings, working primarily on extraordinary historic buildings undergoing adaptive reuse. Each had outlived their original occupants, ideas, and technologies, and Hannah relished the opportunity to transform them. Then transformation sought Hannah when her son was diagnosed with Duchenne muscular dystrophy. Armed with experience, a capacity to generalize her skills into new realms, and a newfound appreciation of systemic barriers, she went to work, adapting the world to be more responsive to the user, living with different ability. Today, Hannah is almost finished with her MBA from the University of Washington. She is an architect, a disability advocate, and a business management consultant. So Hannah, thank you so much for being here today, and I will now turn the time and the screen over to you.
And start video. Can everybody see me?
We can see you, Hannah. Welcome.
Wonderful. Thanks so much for that wonderful introduction, Marissa. And thank you, Carolyn, for giving us a lot of context about equipment that will be set the stage nicely for the conversation. Give me a minute here to share my screen and put this presentation into presenter mode. All right. Can you guys see the presentation?
Not yet.
Can you now? Not yet?
Not yet.
Okay, hang on just a second. Let me try that again. Sorry, I'm toggling between a couple of screens here. There, try this again.
There you are. Just need to switch to presenter mode and you're good to go.
Exactly. All right. All right. Should be all set there. Okay. So I've titled this presentation Increasing Accessibility, and the reason for that is that, frankly, perfection cannot be the goal. This is really an immensely uphill battle that we all face as families, because really it's such a large lift to arrive at a situation that would be ideal in a context where there's a lot of barriers to arrive there. So the goal here would be moving closer at a sustainable pace and something that's achievable, and that's frankly going to be a more holistic and healthy goal than trying to arrive at perfection. So as somebody who's lived the same journey as you're living, I just urge you to, number one, hopefully you get from this presentation a view that there are some great solutions and possibilities out there, that it doesn't have to look like a hospital or look clinical. But I also urge you to feel, as a result of this presentation, like you don't have to be perfect in the solutions you arrive at. You have to find a solution that works for your entire family, and it has to be a livable process that really makes the journey possible, because you're juggling an awful lot of things when you're raising a child or more than one child with DMD. And every single family in this situation is unique. So there will be families for whom simply getting through the front door is going to be a financial challenge. and families for whom creating an incredibly accessible home that's a beautiful example of accessible architecture is going to be the goal. And so I will attempt in this presentation to address kind of the full range and scope of those potential aspirations. So, let's see here. We've got a big agenda to cover in a short amount of time. While this topic is typically thought of as something that's pretty technical, I also want to have a chance to talk a little bit about the soft sides. I'm going to discuss a lot the idea of an approach that you take, because some of the technical challenges, as I just talked about a few minutes ago, are not necessarily going to always be within our reach. I'm going to point you to some technical resources, because everybody's situation is so individual that I'm not going to be able to solve unique problems for individual families in today's conversation. So I'm going to keep it broad in general today. And I would urge you, when you ask questions, to try and aim your questions in a way that they can be relevant for the whole group so that we all learn something. All right, when change is the constant, that's what it's like living with DMD. So meet Jacob, my son. The first picture in the pumpkin patch is at age 9, when he was still ambulatory. He was ambulatory relatively late. Here he is at age 10 in the middle in his first power scooter, which was an item that was on loan from the DMD loaner closet. And then again at 17 at the end in his power wheelchair. So housing and construction in general are long-term investments. It's really hard to think about a long-term investment and reconcile that when the goal often in the context of DMD is trying to uphold the idea of hope. It's really hard to plan for a future that's difficult to accept and contradicts that idea of hope. Unfortunately, plan we must. So this is kind of similar to the conversation we just had when we were talking about equipment, because it takes time to do construction, like it takes time to order equipment. And if I could reflect on our own journey, I would say, I mean, look at the joy on his face in that scooter in the middle picture. We waited way too long to introduce equipment into our life. I think that as a family, we would have been better served if we had jumped in a little earlier. Who among us can truly lay claim to comfort with ambiguity? Even though as a professional, I live in that world and I'm very good at that, when it comes to our personal lives, it's just not easy. And when it comes to things like home remodeling and to thinking about living with change and planning for change, this is exceptionally difficult. And this is part of the reason why we're not just going to talk about technical solutions today. We're also going to talk about the soft sides of change and making changes in your home today. Comfort with ambiguity is kind of at the heart of what makes some of this hard. Well, that and financing things also makes things hard. So I want to urge you to remember that taking care of yourself and taking care of every member of the family is also part of taking care of your loved one who has DMD. If you can't put your oxygen mask on first and sort of be whole and capable yourself, it makes it very hard to also support your loved one and the remaining members of your family. So here's why it's hard. We actually have not great data in the United States about the rate of accessible housing. But to the extent that we do have data from the US Census and from other resources, less than 1% of US housing is wheelchair accessible. Our rate of need is higher than that. Additionally, while quantities of wheelchair accessible housing are increasing presently, the rate of the need for wheelchair accessible housing is increasing faster than the rate of the growth of accessible housing. And therefore, we have a problem on our hands. The Fair Housing Act of 1991 made a significant difference in what the requirements were. So that introduced a new expectation that a certain percentage of new construction would include accessible units. Unfortunately, well, fortunately, that percentage of accessible units was required, but those units are restricted only to income qualified housing and to multifamily housing. That's great as a starting place, and it's a very important need that's being served as a result of that. I think it's incredibly critical that income qualified housing have a percentage that's accessible. It's incredibly important to have 1 and 2 bedroom apartment units available that are accessible, but it doesn't actually address what we still think of as the typical American dream. So single family home ownership, which is still the vision that we tend to hold up, is still not very accessible. And there's still no mandate that it be more accessible. So let's take a minute and examine that dream. We have some typologies of housing that we really like in this country, the colonial being one of them, tends to be extremely inaccessible. The Victorian is about our most vertical typology. Again, a very accessible example, very inaccessible example. The bungalow gets a little better because it likes to stress the horizontal, and oftentimes it doesn't have a lot of stairs, and it often includes bedrooms on the first floor. So this is moving in a better direction. The ranch gets us a little closer yet. Oftentimes we eliminate steps at the front doors, and we certainly have bedrooms on first floors in these examples. Apartments and condos can also be a good option. Although again, the accessible units here sometimes are currently occupied or not necessarily rented to people who have accessibility needs. Limited alterations may stand in the way of really meeting the needs of an individual family. Sometimes we have problems with malfunctioning elevators in this situation, and egress can be a challenge in these settings. So let's take a step back and talk about the role of standards. I think most of us have heard about the Americans with Disabilities Act, and I want to talk about who it's designed for and what it focuses on solving. So if people with disabilities were formally recognized as a minority group, they would actually be the largest minority group in the United States. They would actually also, though, be the most diverse. So when the American with Disabilities Act was designed, it's designed to cover a very broad range of potential needs. And largely, it focuses on the needs of adults in public settings. As a result, it's designed specifically around reach, around heights, around dimensions that aren't necessarily tailored to the specifics of our children in our homes. So it's a very useful place to start, but we need to be prepared to understand that it may not actually solve the problems that we're seeking to solve in our home setting. So the U.S. Access Board is tasked with creating the ADA standards. They have a website you can go to, and I'm going to provide a link to that coming up in the presentation. But you need to recognize that this is a starting point and not an ending point. So get prepared to interpret the standards. Here's Jacob again with his brand new power wheelchair when he was significantly younger than he is now. And this was a little exercise we did at our local children's hospital where we just recorded the act of doing a pivot transfer, trying to understand in what ways were the existing bars helpful or not helpful, so that when we remodeled our own bathroom at home, that we'd have some guidance about what we needed to install. Here he is at a sink in that same bathroom. And as you can see, while every aspect of this bathroom meets the ADA standards, it doesn't actually fit Jacob. So again, be ready to look at this, at the context, and be ready to interpret it. So one thing that could be a really useful guide beyond the standards themselves is to know that there are actually books out there that interpret the ADA standards and provide an illustrated guide to them. I provide a reference to one of those books at the end of this presentation. You should know that building professionals like contractors and architects are not necessarily specialists in these guidelines. Some of them truly are, and you should seek out those specialists and not just assume that all building professionals will be familiar. And just know that one size doesn't fit all. And anybody who's selling you a one size fits all approach, you might want to rethink your relationship with them. So for example, if a contractor says to you, oh, I've done dozens of ADA bathrooms, they may or may not be the right fit for a project that you want to engage in. Because if they have a very rigid or limited view of what that looks like, then, and they're not willing to adjust that for the specific needs of your family, they might not be the right fit for that situation. So developing an understanding of the standards, using existing spaces to test that, and just recognizing that sometimes universal design, which is a wonderful concept, or a one-size-fits-all standard isn't the right fit. And remember, everything's going to evolve. Your kid's going to grow. Needs are going to change. Before you know it, it's going to be about their ability to function independently in the kitchen or something else. So I encourage you to focus on being inclusive, creative, and adaptive. And as long as you keep those at the center of your thought process, these ideas, then rather than focusing so much on making fixed solutions that are permanent changes to your house, having a growing and adaptive strategy, an agile approach, that's probably going to serve you better than hundreds of thousands of dollars of construction. Life hacking. And we mentioned hacking already in the last presentation, and it's no accident. Within the world of disability community, there's a really rich history of creativity and adaptive use. Using existing objects and transforming them in ways that are creative and useful. So if anybody's familiar with the international soccer community, you'll know that this horn is a vuvuzela. And you know, our OTs at Children's Hospital got to know the phrase that we use in our household, use the vuvuzela. So this phrase in our household is just a shorthand way of saying hack it. And it arrived one night when Jacob wanted to be able to use the bathroom independently, and he was concerned about having an accident and couldn't quite reach the toilet, but he didn't want us in there helping him out. And so we happened to have a vuvuzela sitting around. It's basically a giant funnel. And so we said, Jacob, use the vuvuzela, hand it to him, and left the bathroom. Leave it at that. You may never look at a vuvuzela again, and for that, I'm sorry if I've given you that image. It's a useful concept, though. So just want to remind everybody, this is a team sport, not an individual sport. It can feel like a very complicated dance with a high likelihood of some crushed toes. So it's not just about the individual with DMD, There's also a whole family involved, siblings involved, caregivers, equipment, new techniques. In our case, there was a service dog. The pressing need for more space is utterly unavoidable. And the necessity to function well as a team is also utterly unavoidable. That's why I keep focusing on these soft skills of being inclusive, creative, and adaptive. And statistically speaking, this is research-based. Underlying those are empathy, psychological safety, and exploration. Okay, I think I've made my point. So now we can move on to the technical. Visitability, entry, and navigation. So nostalgia can often be our first barrier. We just think about houses in a certain way. But if we can strip that away, the steps are the second barrier, and getting through the front door is the third. Portable ramps are a great solution in a pinch. So this promotes visitability, and visitability is an important concept because it's not just our own home that we want to be accessible. We want to be able to get to grandma's house, to a friend's house, to a neighbor's house. So these can navigate a few steps at a time. Just use caution because they're not really a permanent solution. So modular ramps can be reconfigured. They can be passed from family to family, and they're a sturdy and great choice for that. So do be cautious about the safety aspect and follow the manufacturer's instructions. So we used a modular ramp temporarily, and when we got it from the family that had it before us, we all wept. And when we passed it on to the next family, they did too. Ultimately, we installed a permanent ramp solution at our house. This is a combination of ramp at grade and ramp on a deck. So it can look very nice if you're prepared to make that investment in your house. And I show this particular illustration here so that you can really get a sense of what that looks like with the at-grade solution versus the deck above grade solution portion of it. Of course, you need handrails on the above grade solution portion of it. And this is about 52 inches of change in level from the deck to the patio area. And therefore, it's 52 feet of ramp that's in the garden, woven around the garden beds. So 1 inch of change in level for 1 foot of run is the standard. I'm not going to read through all these key points. This presentation will be available for reference later, but I would urge you to go to the access board and read the complete guidelines if you're approaching a project like this. Once you get indoors, there's a whole bunch of additional sets of guidelines that you need to be thinking about in terms of navigating space. Again, I'd urge you to go to the guidelines. Practical approaches at large, start with a good canvas. If your projects are stacking up and construction costs are getting high, you may actually, moving may be a worthwhile consideration. Minimize the number of construction projects necessary and do those well. Take a tiered approach to space planning, which I'll address in the next slide, and get inclusive, creative, and adaptive. And the reason for that is that it may not actually be an architectural solution that's your best answer. What do I mean by a tiered approach? Focus first on the spaces where individual daily needs are met. Next, on all shared family spaces. Give yourself permission not to make every aspect of your house accessible, because it may simply be too big a lift. With bathrooms, the issue is always going to be space. Clinical is not a requirement. Your bathroom does not have to look like a hospital. Unfortunately, however, having space really does matter, and coordination with equipment is really critical. So while this wall-hung toilet looks very modern over here with a big X, it doesn't actually work, because here's our bathroom with a rehab chair over the toilet, and you can see that the wheels need enough room to wheel over the entire toilet. Here's a very glamorous looking shower, roll-in shower. I show it to you because they've done everything right from a technical standpoint. If you notice, the drain is at the back of the shower. And on the other side, you can see our shower. Our drain is also at the back of the shower. I point that out because a lot of quick fixes to roll-in showers place the drain towards the front, which can be a huge problem with regard to water infiltration. It's not necessarily going to be, but water infiltration is something you want to be extremely concerned about. And water infiltration should be one of your biggest concerns. This is the place where one should always consider a professional. Consider an equipment-based solution. So a track system like this, and we talked about this with equipment in the last presentation, it may fit over your existing toilet and bathtub, avoiding a lot of construction dollars, and also potentially avoiding a potential water intrusion issue. So then you just have to be sure you have adequate room for safe transfers at the toilet end. So here's an elegant sink, and here's Jacob at our sink. And what's really critical is that he has room for his knees and his chair underneath the deck, and room for his arms on top, and he can reach the faucets. So we designed it with a very short distance from the front of the sink to the back of the faucets. Two things you should never compromise on. One, water management. Two, safety. Bathrooms are the place where the most accidents happen. So take the time. This is the moment. If ever there was a moment to consider engaging professionals, this is it. Obviously, a typical kitchen presents multiple safety and accessibility issues. This is an example of a custom designed, fully accessible kitchen that was made for a single wheelchair-based user. So this is not going to be a practical, financial, or functional solution for most of us. However, pull-out units, which are an off-the-shelf option, is a relatively accessible response for many of us. And you can reorganize your kitchen, where things are stored, place things within reach for different members of the family. So I have to admit, I really wish I had this in my kitchen. If there was only one accessibility item that you could place in a kitchen, and I don't have an accessible kitchen in my house. We had to prioritize different things in our home. But if we had one item, it would be this, because it would allow for participation in meal preparation, cleanup, or just quick hand wash, which would increase independence, inclusion in family life. And more accessible cooking. Well, again, a fully accessible stove may be a luxury. Accessible snacks, maybe not such a luxury. So a microwave drawer, which is installed below counter height, can be an option. I refer to this section as advanced maneuvers because anytime you're trying to deal with more than one level in a house, you're really bumping into much higher costs and into installing products within a home that generally are installed in a commercial setting. So residential elevators have fully enclosed cabs within a shaft. They can travel to many floors. They have issues with maintenance and reliability, and they are very expensive. Can you do it? Of course you can, if money's not an issue. Platform lift is an open platform with sidewalls. It can travel only shorter distances. Again, it has issues with maintenance and reliability. And again, it is a relatively expensive solution. Inclined lifts you may have seen in school buildings that have been renovated, older ones. Again, it's a commercial product. Can you put it in your house? You can if you have a very wide stair. They also have issues with maintenance and reliability. So practical approaches to houses with multiple stories. Use that tiered approach to space planning. See if you can focus on making your first floor the accessible floor. Use other floors for other parts of family living. Utilize existing or create exterior access to a second level. So maybe your basement opens out at a ground floor level and you can make an exterior pathway to make it accessible. Or take that get inclusive, creative, and adaptive approach and that tiered approach and redirect how you live in your house and make sure that it remains inclusive, but be creative about how you do it. Reminder of the tiered approach. Emergency planning. So egress is a technical term for getting out in an emergency. So if you've installed an elevator or lift, or if you live in an apartment building or a multi-story building, you need to plan to get out in an emergency. While a bedroom with a door out to a patio may seem like a luxury, if you have a bedroom for a person with a disability with limited mobility, the ability to get out of the room in a fire to a safe location where they can be rescued is not a luxury, it's a necessity. So it's important to plan for those contingencies and for that plan to include evacuation equipment and to include a conversation with the fire department as well. Bedrooms. So once again, I just want to acknowledge the nostalgia component of it because I think most of us brought to parenthood a vision of a specific experience of being a parent or a specific experience of our children's childhood. But I want to kind of emphasize a bedroom is just a room that you've chosen to personalize. That could have been your former dining room. It's okay to get creative and adaptive in this situation. So for some of us, just setting aside convention and nostalgia is an important first step to redesigning life in a way that actually works for us. Make the necessary room for your equipment, but that doesn't mean it needs to feel clinical. So use decor to make it a home and find ways to mount things on the wall so that it's easier to navigate around this space. Going to give you a brief crash course in master planning, something we do all the time as architects and as managers. So you start with a plan foundation by increasing knowledge, develop your priorities, your budget, and find your team. You pencil out the big picture. So you think of all the things that you might want or need. Then size it. Size it down to fit your current needs and your current budget. And the reason for that is to keep it really within your capacity. The last thing that you need is to take on projects that are bigger than your family can really handle or manage at this moment. So you're going to focus in on what are the most important priorities right now. So then why bother having thought about that bigger picture? The reason is that as you worked on other components of that plan, if you've thought about the big picture, there may be ways in which the work you do on the portions of a plan you're tackling now are mindful or incorporate systems or planning that will make those other projects easier in the future. I just want to say, as somebody who's lived this journey, it's okay to feel mad about this sometimes. It's okay to feel kind of overwhelmed at times because this is an overwhelming situation. And it's okay for your kids to feel mad about it too sometimes. In a lot of ways, all of us were dealt a difficult hand. And to the extent that our rage fuels change for the better, then it's productive. So this image here is from the Capitol Crawl. This was a disability protest that led to the passage of the Americans with Disabilities Act after months of inaction by Congress. So just know that when your anger stops you dead in your tracks, turn to your family and your DMD community, find a way to reset and to keep building. Ed Roberts was a student at Berkeley and was a post-polio quadriplegic who, along with several generations of young disability advocates, transformed the picture for our kids. But that work is not done. This is the Ed Roberts campus in Berkeley, California. This is where the Center for Independent Living and a bunch of other disability advocacy organizations are now housed in an absolutely stunning building with one of the most beautiful accessibility ramps to the second floor. That's that image in the middle that I have ever seen. And they have this lovely pioneering concept here of elevator call buttons that are at the level of a foot pedal that you can operate from your wheelchair. So here's what advocacy can bring about. Be thoughtful and let ideas about beauty evolve. So deeply held beliefs about aesthetics can unintentionally or intentionally be exclusionary. And as somebody who's trained as a background in architecture, this is something that, it's hard to have maybe inadvertently been part of. Obviously, my worldview has shifted, but creative solutions can be controversial, like this ramp solution in the middle. It's beautiful, but also there are individuals with disabilities who think of this as a very unsafe solution, and yet it's a very elegant solution. And this modern striping for paving on the far side, first of all, the slanted logo with the disability symbol is great because it shows an active disability symbol as opposed to just a passive disability symbol. And I never thought I would think of pavement striping as beautiful, but I do now. Sometimes the accessibility feature quite literally makes the design. And I wish you could have seen the kids when Jacob went out in this particular Halloween costume, saying to their parents, "Look, it's the real Mario." Strive for a state of grace, not perfection. This sort of otherworldly thing that landed at a beach in Norway is just a pathway to get from a parking lot down to a beach. But what started as an accessibility solution ended as something quite elegant, albeit different from what we're used to seeing. So welcome home, a place for belonging, joy, proud struggle at times. It's going to be imperfect, but it should be comfortable. And here are some resources.
Thank you so much, Hannah. This has been a really beautiful presentation and just so many unique ideas. So thank you so much. It does look like maybe we have some questions or comments. And please, if you have other questions or comments and want to chat them in, please do so. It looks like an attendee shared that an important aspect of home modification is being able to think outside the box. We were able to find a plumber that was willing to install our bathroom sink inside the shower to make it easier to access the sink for shaving and brushing my teeth. So
That's great. That's exactly what I was trying to convey with this presentation, is the importance of being willing to think outside the box.
Definitely. Another person commented that they did a virtual platform lift outside because of limited space. And for my own curiosity, what is a virtual platform lift?
Well, I think that what they're referring to is that a platform, I don't think that it's virtual, I think that it's actual, but platform lifts are hard to install inside because you have to cut a great big hole in the interior of your house, and that becomes a difficult structural problem. And so platform lifts are not infrequently installed outside by building an external enclosure for them. And, you know, sometimes they're enclosed, sometimes they're not enclosed, but putting a platform lift to the exterior is a great solution. That's like a halfway, you know, it doesn't cost a dramatic amount of money. It's much less than an elevator, and it's much less disruption to the interior of the house. So I applaud that solution.
Another attendee said that they'd love to see different plans on the bathroom layout, particularly the shower. Not sure where to look.
Yeah. So I think this is sort of what I was alluding to at the beginning. The quick answer with showers is the bigger the better. And, you know, there are solutions where you can literally pop a standard bathtub out and an accessible pan in. And so that's a standard 30 by 5 foot footprint. And most of those solutions have what I was alluding to, that drain at the front. The problem with those solutions is that while they have a very pragmatic appeal, every drain I have ever known in a shower will clog someday. And when that happens and that drain is at the front, it will overflow. And the question is, where is it going to overflow, and what's the waterproofing solution that's outboard of it in the rest of your bathroom? So unless your contractor is doing an incredibly thorough job of waterproofing the rest of the bathroom, you can introduce problems that you hadn't had to begin with. So for shower solutions that are curbless, those are such customized solutions that are so specific to the structural uniquenesses of one house or another that it's very difficult to show a standardized solution.
Any tips? One of the questions that I've gotten from the community before is, you know, if you rent your house or you rent your apartment, what are the best ways to approach your landlord or whomever, the property management company, about modifications? Have you had experience with that?
So there is where the recommendation about an equipment-based solution really comes into play. So we actually set up a bathroom at Children's Hospital, at Seattle Children's Hospital. We set up a demonstration bathroom, and we actually tried to convince the hospital to install an actual residential bathroom in the hospital so that families could test equipment in real conditions. Ironically, we couldn't get them to do it because it wasn't ADA. But we really wanted to give people the opportunity to really experience real life conditions and the challenges associated with them in a test scenario. But within existing bathroom footprints and existing bathroom setups, those track systems that I had illustrated are often the best bet. If you can remove the majority of the sink configuration, but retain the toilet and the bathtub, which are often adjacent to each other, so that you have enough room to maneuver within the space, and then you relocate the sink to outside of the bathroom, then you can often work within the existing footprint of a bathroom without making major changes. So in terms of the approach with the landlord, there, I think you're relying on law and the guidelines to make the case. And, that's where the value of all this advocacy is. The Americans with Disabilities Act and the associated guidelines, becoming familiar with those things and being able to describe to the landlord, that you have a right to accessible housing, and understanding those rights is really the starting point.
For sure. Look in here, see if there's any other questions. Don't see any other questions coming in. Give it one more second here. As a parent and an architect, Hannah, what did you find to be the most challenging when you were trying to figure out your own home and your own space for your son?
Definitely what I talked about, where the aspirations are larger than what is feasible. And I think that most especially finding the balancing act between, you want to do everything for your child, and yet everything is not actually what's compatible with the best experience of family life for the whole family. We embarked on a huge addition to our house. We added 260 square feet to make a 1917 bungalow accessible. And to be quite honest, it was too much. And, so to some extent, some of the advice I give in this presentation is lessons learned. If I had it to do all over again, I would have bitten off less architecturally and focused more on the time and the relationships and the people. And so that's where my cautionary notes about, focusing on relationships and accepting things that are middle solutions and not feeling that you have to do everything. It really comes from personal experience.
Well, thank you for sharing that. That's really great to remember. I think we all can get very stressed and overwhelmed by all there is to do. So as a parent, again, I'll ask you one more question. What advice would you give to a family that wants to start modifying their home? Where would you start? Like, what's the first thing you would do?
Well, so my little primer on master planning is my little quick guide. And the purpose behind that, I do a lot of master planning with individuals and with organizations. That exercise of going big and sort of naming all the things and then figuring out how to bring it back down again and make it small. And there's huge value in having outside perspective. This is what consultants are for. So if you don't have a professional you're working with, then use somebody at the MDA. Use somebody on your care team at your hospital, use a friend, use a family member, find people who can help you do that sorting and discernment exercise about which projects will bring greatest value to your family's life, and focus on those and do those thoroughly and well, and let the others go.
Hannah, thank you so much for being here. Your expertise and just approach and your personal experience is so valuable. So thank you very much.